Hello, everyone. My name is Dominic, and today I have the great pleasure of having with me Pradeep Goel, CEO of Solve.Care. For this segment, we'll be looking at what the future holds for digital currency, especially in the healthcare industry. Pradeep's experience in the healthcare industry spans 30 years. An entrepreneur at heart, he has founded and runs four successful health tech companies. He has also advised international governments on healthcare benefit administration models, and being listed in Goldman Sachs' 100 most promising entrepreneurs globally is just another one of the very many accomplishments that this man has. So, Pradeep, let's jump straight into it. Can you tell us a little bit about, say, what your predictions for the healthcare industry in 2021 will be, and maybe even beyond?
Hello, Dominic. Thank you for having me here, and it is a pleasure to speak to you all. And I look forward to our conversation. And thank you for the introduction. In terms of answering your question about healthcare and the prediction for healthcare in 2021, I think the one trend that everyone on the planet can now see clearly is that healthcare is going digital, both in terms of access and delivery, and that we are going to see a very different model of healthcare post-COVID than we had before. And that transformation is just starting and is going to continue to pick up pace. But if we were to choose one word to describe the healthcare of future, that word is digital health. We're moving away from healthcare that was driven by and constrained and bound to geography, and we're moving towards a digital health model, be it in terms of benefit coordination, be it in terms of care coordination and care delivery, or be it in terms of care continuity and follow-up. And it will give people more choices. It will give people better access to care. It'll also improve the way doctors practice medicine and will reduce a lot of friction from the process. The journey is going to be very exciting, but in the end, digital health is here to stay, and it is going to become the dominant mechanism through which we are going to take care of each other.
All right, interesting indeed. So, when you talk about being digital, then I presume then you're talking about the latest technologies that would be introduced into healthcare. So one of these latest technologies obviously is blockchain. So what do you think this role of blockchain and digital currency can play in healthcare for this coming year and maybe as again beyond?
Again, as we look at a different healthcare delivery model in front of us, it looks quite different than the view behind the rear view mirror of the last 30, 40 years. And for as long as I've been in healthcare, everybody has agreed, be it the insurance company or the policymakers or the insurance commissioners or hospital administrators or doctors or patients, that it would be better if we changed the way doctors and patients interacted with each other. It would be a lot better if we change the way payments are delivered to doctors, because that is inefficient and fraught with risk and fraught with inefficiency and in many cases fraud. So the future of healthcare will certainly be driven not just by the need to go digital, but also by certain technologies that will help shape the future of healthcare. So in other words, we're going to have both cause and effect. The real end game here is to make healthcare more accessible to everyone, regardless of where you live. And digital health promises that we will remove the barriers to quality of healthcare just because you happen to be in a geographically disadvantaged location. That barrier will disappear. There will be a question about how do we measure quality of care? How do we manage consents and authorizations and privacy and payments? And for those problems that digital healthcare represents, or will require us to solve, those problems will require technologies that are more decentralized, more globally accessible, and less bound to an entity-based technology stack. So in a simple sense, digital health will also force decentralization of healthcare, because ultimately, the current model of healthcare, which is administered around an office building or around a hospital location or around the doctor's clinic, were comfortably built, supported by IT systems that were also centralized and geographically controlled and managed. So centralized health was supported by centralized IT systems. Digital health will need decentralized systems. where people can join in, elect into, share information freely, and are able to control what, who, when, how their information is seen and shared. So we are absolutely going to see a convergence of digital health and decentralization. In addition to that, equally important trend that we will see is how do we use digital value transfer, digital currencies, digital assets will become the mechanism of payment. Because if digital health is going to do one thing, is going to allow doctors and patients in far-flung areas to see each other and to connect with each other, we are going to have to change the way they pay each other. So in that scenario, we can fully expect that along with a decentralization fabric, such as blockchain, we are going to see also a significant shift in the payment model towards digital currencies. And the third thing that we are going to see is a much, much, much greater focus on data ownership and on data usage. There is no doubt that digital health will create far, far more data than we produce today. And healthcare spits out a lot of data, but it is nothing compared to the data that is coming. The volume and the granularity of data that digital health will produce will be in order of a magnitude greater than the data we have today, an order of a magnitude, which means that data ownership, data privacy, and data controls will become really important. So what does this triangle of transformation in healthcare really means? If you're going down the digital healthcare path, and we are, and that train is now moving and is unlikely to stop, we're moving towards digital payments rather than the administered and peer-to-peer payments that we today do in paper or electronic form. And we go to anyone payment model. And if we get to a significant data management, data control, and privacy issues far greater than we face today, then we are going to see technologies like blockchain, technologies like digital assets such as digital tokens or digital vouchers, and technologies like AI and ML, which are needed to analyze these vast quantities of data. So I do believe that this triangle is the triangle of digitization of healthcare delivery, the digitization of healthcare payments, and the digitization of data and control over this data will drive adoption of technologies like blockchain. But even more so, it'll drive a completely different paradigm in which the ownership of data will shift from institutional ownership to individual ownership.
Okay. You covered quite a bit segment of digitalization and so on, but I would like to maybe focus a little bit on the digital currency side. Now, you're saying that healthcare will start adopting digital currency, but what do you think are the actual characteristics that this digital currency should have to facilitate the adoption of healthcare?
That's a great question. And in my view, the healthcare adoption or adoption of a digital currency for healthcare has to meet at least certain criteria that make it different and more powerful than the current payment mechanisms that are in place today already. So first one is delegated payments. I need to be able to give you a token that you can use to spend it on approved services with approved set of vendors or service providers, such as a doctor or a chiropractor. And that token needs to be transferable from me to you and you to an approved service provider. This ability to do delegated payments is fundamental to successful global digital health adoption, because there is going to be a question of who needs to see whom and who's going to pay for that service. And that third-party payment system will most definitely require a token that can implement a delegated payment model. This is point number one. And fortunately, where we have advanced to with blockchain and with these numerous exciting innovations around tokens and the protocols underneath the tokens, where you can trace and manage the tokens history or leave breadcrumbs along the way and also calculate the value of the token in real time. These advances are near, and we will see the delegated payment model implemented on those. This is point one. Point number two is that we need to have auditability. Payments, by definition, must be audited or auditable. And that quality we see in blockchain already. We're going to see that quality of blockchain implemented in the context of permission blockchains. So we will see the adoption of, most certainly, the auditability and decentralized nature of blockchain to payments, but they will be, by definition, a combination of truly global blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum, which are pure value transfer mechanisms today, by and large, to purpose-built blockchains that are going to allow for specific parties to participate in a blockchain for the specific purpose of providing care and receiving payments. So we're going to see the rise of permission blockchains married to digital currencies. But we will need to ensure that those are decentralized, even if they are permissioned. The third thing that we will see in terms of currency token characteristics is that it needs to have two forms. It needs to be both a stable form at certain points in its existence. It needs to have a computed or variable form of value at other points in its existence. Meaning, you're going to see a convergence of stable coin and open coins, which are floating in value in the market. But depending upon how they are being utilized inside a chain, they may shift from stable to floating and floating back to stable. This concept may be hard to grasp, but if you really think about it, from a consumer perspective, they have to be able to pay using a digital currency whose value they understand at the point of payment. But from a receiver point of view, they must be able to be assured that when they redeem that token, they are receiving the value for which they have already delivered a service, and that value is not going to change. So we are going to see this blended property of tokens or digital payment mechanisms. Now, whether we implement that solely through a token or a combination of a token, wallet, and blockchain, that remains to be seen, but that is clearly coming. The next quality that I will say will be really, really important for a healthcare digital currency to gain global adoption is the ease with which it can be bought. It cannot be something that requires you to have a specific account on a specific exchange. The tokens, the digital currency for healthcare must be accessible without having to learn or participate in specific crypto entry and exit points. So we're going to have to make that a lot more ubiquitous. It has to be a lot simpler and a lot more available than today. So the advent of things like the decentralized protocols where tokens can be paired with other tokens, as they mature, we will see a greater and greater flexibility, but we also need to make it from an application layer perspective, a lot simpler for somebody to get in and out of a digital currency. And then last but not the least, from a business perspective, they need to be able to predict the cost of this currency. Because if you had a scenario where you don't know what the credit card overhead is every time you swipe a card to receive a payment in your store, you won't use that card. You would simply say, sorry, I can't let you pay with a credit card because I don't know what the overhead is going to be. Is it 2% or 20%? So from a service provider perspective, the cost of handling this currency has to become a lot more predictable. Now, the good news is that I'm seeing technological advances, both at companies like Solve.Care, which is what I'm leading currently, and other platform enhancements and protocol enhancements, where all of these are achievable in the near future. But the reason we're going to see the adoption is because there is an actual business need. And all the blockchain and the digital currency space is doing and will continue to do, and will do so more and more quickly, is to deliver the solution that the market needs.
You've obviously given a lot of thought to this. And so, given all that thought, will there be a Bitcoin for healthcare?
It's a great question. Everyone talks about Bitcoin because Bitcoin has become an analogous statement for successful growth of value and wide brand acceptance. In other words, there's hardly anybody who doesn't know that there is Bitcoin, which has been a very successful growth in value asset. But even today, despite its enormous success, it is still a primary store of value rather than a primary exchange of value mechanism. It's not a currency, it's an asset. In the most people's minds, it's an asset that grows rapidly, perhaps at times shrinks rapidly, but in the end, it's an asset. For what healthcare needs and will deliver is more of a currency. And it's not a pure currency in the sense that it's controlled by a central bank, but rather a currency that can be defined and used very effectively inside a care network or inside a model where certain people have agreed to care for certain other people. So we will see a Bitcoin of healthcare, but it's going to be different. And here are the differences. Bitcoin is held by millions of people, but healthcare is needed for every one of us, and there is billions of us. So a successful healthcare currency and healthcare payment system will serve billions. Bitcoin is an option. You can use it, you can invest in it or buy it or hold it or trade it, but it's not a requirement. It does not force you. There is no requirement that you actually do hold Bitcoin, invest in it, believe in it. Any global healthcare currency will become more like a utility where we have to have it. It's like air and water, food and education. Health is fundamental, and a global healthcare currency will be more of a necessity. So I would expect that a successful healthcare currency will be held by billions and used by billions. Whether it has the properties of an increasing asset value, it may. But the property that is more fundamental is that you need it because you need to get healthcare for yourself, your kids, or your parents. Okay. The third thing that I see the difference here is that we're going to see a much greater linkage of the value of this token to actual utility in the market. So if you think about it, healthcare represents something around the lines of $7.5 trillion a year in expense, which means somebody is paying somebody to the tune of 7.5 trillion, or which is $7,500 billion each year. So if you look at it on a daily basis, that's an enormous amount of value exchange that takes place. Far, far, far greater than any trading that can take place. So the volume of a healthcare currency is natural, it's organic, and it's an order of a magnitude bigger than the asset trading. So I think we will see a very different pattern for healthcare currency than Bitcoin, in the sense that it is much more widely held, it's much more frequently used, and there's much greater liquidity, and it's driven by necessity. But I do believe that given the inevitable convergence of a high utility currency with those who see it as an asset and will invest in it as an asset class, that convergence will take place. So I think healthcare will yield, if you will, the next $1 trillion coin or the first $1 trillion coin. In my opinion, no other industry has the compelling need and the fundamental recurring value creation that healthcare does. And digital currency, simply as an artifact of digitization of healthcare that is already happening, will be the next giant. But it will not look like Bitcoin. It will be a different kind of a token, but it will be equally or perhaps an order of a magnitude more relevant to everybody, you and I and our kids and our parents, who may or may not be invested in Bitcoin and may or may not ever invest in Bitcoin.
So in the future, you're confident, because of the needs of healthcare, that we do see an adoption for digital currency in healthcare itself. But when do you think this tipping point will be? Because we're not quite there yet. Will there be a tipping point?
Absolutely. In every industry, there's an adoption tipping point. It happened to things like credit cards. Credit cards were originally the purview of the few, and then it became, and it went down the economic strata to those who were starting to use it for daily life. And now credit cards are held by a majority of the economically active population. And in the case of healthcare, that extends to every human being. There is no person on the planet who's not healthcare active. You're either healthy or you're not, but you are in the healthcare sphere. You're born into it and we'll all die into it. So the point here is that the tipping point comes from when we, and it's hard for me to predict exactly when the tipping point is coming, but I think what we can say safely is that the battle lines are drawn. The trend is clearly accelerating towards digitization of healthcare. And with this digital health growth, and rapid as it is just a beginning, but it already is taking over the traditional healthcare delivery models. And as it accelerates, and it will over the next 24, 36 months, it will drag along all the technologies that we have been looking for adoption, blockchain and AI. It'll also drag along digital payment currencies, and it will really accelerate as we begin to launch use cases around that average person can use. And I like to say this frequently to my team here at Solve.Care, is the day a rickshaw driver in Vietnam can buy a payment token for which he can use to pay a pediatrician in Vienna to see his sick child and do so easily from his phone, or that is the day you're going to see massive adoption. So we are nearing that point. Whether we get there this year, we get there next year, or the year after, the point is it's a bit like building Amazon or building Alibaba. First few years, you invest heavily in building this platform. But when it takes off, then it becomes difficult to even remember how things were before that platform was active. It's hard to remember how we did shopping before Amazon, but there was a day and time when they were simply under the radar investing heavily in their infrastructure. I think we are past the heavy investment point. Now we are in the adaptation and adoption point. And I do believe that the next 3 to 5 years are going to transform healthcare globally. And I do believe that in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see the rise of digital currency as the preferred payment mechanism between the patient, provider, and payer triangle. That is commonly where the $7 trillion gets spent.
Thank you very much for your insights, Pradeep. You have definitely given me much food for thought. So before we conclude here, if there was one key takeaway message from this session, right, the one most important thing that you want people, they should really take note of, what would that be?
I think the message I will deliver is that you cannot fight demographic trends. And when demographic trends take over, change is inevitable. And we are dealing with healthcare undergoing a demographic shift. The aging population, the globalization of workforce, the coronavirus that changed our perception of how we're going to live and work, the need to rebalance demand and supply of healthcare, the inequities in healthcare. These are seismic forces. These are not forces created by or managed by any one country, one government, one human being. These are seismic forces. They are forces of nature. And these forces are aligned towards healthcare becoming digital, healthcare becoming decentralized, healthcare going to a more peer-to-peer payment model where the control over data and decisions and control over privacy and consent is clearly shifting from the enterprise to the consumer. And in this era and this seismic change that we are dealing with, as the new era dawns, blockchain will flourish, and so will platforms like Solve.Care, and so will currencies and tokens like Solve and others, who are essentially saying, we're going to give you a different paradigm of delivery of care, coordination of care, payment of care, and access and outcomes of care. That train has now arrived at the station and is going to move. One way or the other, the change is upon us. We can fight it only to our disadvantage, or we can anticipate it. And if you are someone who is interested in digital assets or in blockchain or in healthcare, or overall a champion of change or want to invest in the change, this is a trend that needs to be studied and understood. Because this change is not driven by a company or by a country. This is a seismic change driven by the demographics of our planet. So I'm very optimistic that we can leverage this change to make humanity better, to give people a better quality of life, better access to care, and a better experience in terms of when they do get sick and they need our support and attention, that we can do so in a much more effective way. And yes, blockchain has a role to play, a big one, but even bigger role is the role of a digital currency and consent and privacy management tokens that healthcare needs and will get.
Okay. Thank you once again, Pradeep. And thank you all to our audience for being here with us. So I, for one, am truly excited about the changes and the future that holds for 2021, especially when we talk about digital currencies in the healthcare space. So to everyone, do take care and stay safe.